It's April the 9th, 2021, and our reading today in the book of Judges is in chapter 8. Now the Ephraimites asked Gideon, "Why have you treated us like this? Why didn't you call us when you went to fight Midian?" And they criticized him sharply. But he answered them, "What have I accomplished compared to you? Aren't the gleanings of Ephraim's grapes better than the full grape harvest of Abiezer? God gave Oreb and Zeb, the Midianite leaders, into your hands. What was I able to do compared to you?" At this, their resentment against him subsided. Gideon and his 300 men, exhausted yet keeping up the of Succoth, "Give my troops some bread, they're worn out, and I'm still pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian." But the officials of Succoth said, "Do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give bread to your troops?" Then Gideon replied, "Just for that. When the Lord has given Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will tear your flesh with desert thorns and briars." From there he went up to Peniel and made the same request of them, but they answered as the men of Succoth had. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with a force of about 15,000 men, all that were left of the armies of the eastern peoples. 120,000 swordsmen had fallen. Gideon went up by the route of the nomads east of Nobah and Jog-Behar and fell upon the unsuspecting army. Zebah and Zalmunna, the two kings, the two kings of Midian fled, but he pursued them and captured them, routing their entire army. Gideon, son of Joash, then returned from the battle by the pass of Heres. He caught a young man of Succoth and questioned him, and the young man wrote down for him the names of the 77 officials of Succoth, the elders of the town. Then Gideon came and said to the men of Succoth, "Here are Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you taunted me by saying, 'Do you already have the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna in your possession? Why should we give bread to your exhausted men?'" He took the elders of the town and taught the men of Succoth a lesson by punishing them with desert thorns and briars. He also pulled down the tower of Peniel and killed the men of the town. Then he asked Zebah and Zalmunna, "What kind of men did you kill at Tabor?" "Men like you," they answered, "each one with the bearing of a prince." Gideon replied, "Those were my brothers, the sons of my own mother. As surely as the Lord lives, if you had spared their lives, I would not kill you." Turning to Jether, his older son, he said, "Kill them." But Jether did not draw his sword because he was only a boy and was afraid. Zebah and Zalmunna said, "Come, do it yourself. As is the man, so is his strength." So Gideon stepped forward and killed them and took the ornaments off their camels' necks. The Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us out of the hand of Midian." But Gideon told them, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." And he said, "I do have one request, that each of you give me an earring from your share of the plunder." It was the custom of the Ishmaelites to wear gold earrings. They answered, "We'll be glad to give them." So they spread out a garment, and each man threw a ring from his plunder onto it. The weight of the gold rings he asked for came to 1,700 shekels, not counting the ornaments, the pendants, and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, or the chains that were on their camels' necks. Gideon made the gold into an ephod, which he placed in Ophrah, his town. All Israel prostituted themselves by worshipping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. Thus Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again. During Gideon's lifetime, the land enjoyed peace for 40 years. Jerubbaal, son of Joash, went back home to live. He had 70 sons of his own, for he had many wives. His concubine, who lived in Shechem, also bore him a son, whom he named Abimelech. Gideon, son of Joash, died at a good old age and was buried in the tomb of his father Joash in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. No sooner had Gideon died than the Israelites again prostituted themselves to the Baals. They set up Baal Berith as their god and did not remember the Lord their God, who had rescued them from the hands of all their enemies on every side. They also failed to show kindness to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, for all the good things he had done for them. Amen. Well, sadly, now we come to the end of the story of Gideon, the end of his life. And we find by the end of the story, we find now a changed man, but not in a good way. He handles criticism well in the opening verses, doesn't he? That shows some skill and grace, verses 1 to 3. But then, this is now in the second phase of the war against the Midianites. In verses 4 to 9, we see how he is rejected by the men of Succoth and the men of Peniel. But in response to that are these words of retribution. Verse 7, I'll tear your flesh. Verse 9, I'll tear down this tower. He keeps his promise, we might say, but again, not in a good way. The threat, the retribution is enacted upon these people in verses 13 to 17. Well, the war unfolds, the pursuit particularly of these Midianite kings, Zebah and Zalmunna. And there's something rather wild now about Gideon. He doesn't even rest. He doesn't even take thought. There's no reference to him praying or seeking the Lord. Yes, there were problems with the fleece at the end of chapter 6, but they were sincere problems from a man desperate for reassurance from God. There's nothing of that now. It's all in his hands. He's doing it according to his own strength and wisdom, it seems to me. And he's increasingly out of control. The way that he attacks these two kings, well, I suppose that was inevitable. But look at verses 18 to 21 and the way that they are killed. Again, this is an act of retribution upon them because they murdered his own brothers. And it is Gideon himself who takes up the sword and brutally kills them. But the people cry out to Gideon, rule over us, you, your son and your grandson, because you've saved us out of the hand of Midian. He's behaving like an Oriental despot. That was normal in those days and in the Eastern nations around. And they had their rulers, their little kings, and these men who were little dictators, really, and ruled with a rod of iron. And the people can see that. That's what's happening to Gideon. That's what he's turning into. And tragically, that's what they want. It's almost like he's encouraging them in that. He says, verse 23, I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. He's got enough sense to say that. But despite his fine-sounding, grand-sounding words, the reality is that he is living like a dictator, like a despot. He is conducting himself like their ruler. He doesn't have the name, but we'll see in the following chapter how his son definitely takes on that mantle. Where's his humility gone? Where is his godliness? Where is the weak and feeble one seeking divine reassurance? All of that sadly is gone. And even when he makes this ephod in verse 27 out of the pagan jewelry, that might seem a good thing again. It sounds good. The ephod that the priest had back in the law of Moses, do you remember? It was a kind of an instrument for discerning guidance from God. You might think that's a good thing. But look where it all leads. It leads to the most terrible thing. All Israel prostituted themselves by worshipping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. And Gideon's end, verses 28 to 35, his legacy, we might call it, at the end, it all goes very sour, and it's rather depressing. It certainly reminds us that the best of men, and this man Gideon certainly has, feet of clay, and is fallible and frail. I think, I might be wrong here, and if I am wrong, please correct me. I think there's only one reference to Gideon in the New Testament, I think. And I think it's there in Hebrews 11, verse 32. He's mentioned by name, verse 32. And then later on, it speaks of people, verse 34, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Well, that could be applied to many people in the Old Testament, but I think that must be specifically a reference to Gideon. That's interesting, isn't it? In this chapter, there's no mention of the faults and failings of this man or any of the other great heroes of faith who are mentioned in the chapter. We've seen this before. Yes, in the narratives of the Old Testament, those faults and failings are clearly exposed to teach us, to warn us, to help us. But now when God comes to draw up a list of his what we might call his honors list, Gideon is in there, and it's his faith and his achievements by faith that are emphasized. God commends him, verse 39, and all these other far from perfect saints. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. There's no perfection in the Old Testament. There's no perfection for us now, in a sense, because we, like them, we are also looking forward true perfection. We have it in Christ, but we won't experience it until he comes in the new creation. Verse 40, God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect.